Hello, everyone. We will get started in about 1 more minute, so please stand by. We'll be starting shortly. Thank you. All right, well, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Let's go ahead and get today's session started. Welcome to our webinar, Before You Spend Another Cybersecurity Dollar, Make It Count. My name is Amber Colson, Event Marketing Manager with MyNewsFire. I know you're all eager to see the star of today's show, J.R. Cunningham, but before I turn it over to him, just a few quick logistical items. After seeing today's content, you'll probably have some questions. We encourage you to submit those at any time using either the chat panel or the questions panel on your screen. We'll address them later in the session. You'll also receive a recording of today's presentation via email within the next 48 hours, usually quite a bit sooner than that, usually right as soon as we're done, but I give myself that extra little bit of wiggle room. I'd now like to introduce you to today's speaker, J.R. Cunningham, our CISO here at MyNewsFire. J.R., over to you.
Hi, thank you, Amber. Thanks everyone for joining. Really appreciate you being here. For those of you that attended yesterday's webinar where we talked about staying ahead of the enemy and kind of how to stay one step ahead of what the bad guys are doing and how they operate. This is really kind of a continuation of that conversation. Wanted to share with you really a few things today. One is, without question, the greatest struggle that I've had in the last 2 decades as a cybersecurity consultant and as a security leader is advising my clients and my employers on where to spend that next dollar on security. It's a real challenge, and it's not gotten any easier, frankly. It's as hard as it ever has been, and our industry is so much more complex than it used to be. So I want to spend some time talking about how we got here. Let's kind of hit the rewind button a little bit and talk about the history that led up to some of these challenges that we have as practitioners today. I'd like to share some of my perspective on how to maximize the security budget. How do we enable key initiatives both for the business as well as in the security program? What does it look like to get better over time? How do we peer about the rest of the industry and see what's going on in the industry and get better? And then finally, some perspectives on really what's the anatomy of a next generation security program. I welcome your questions. Please throw them at me. We'll get to them at the end. Don't hesitate. There's we're not going to beat you to death with PowerPoint. This is more of just a conversation from the CISO's perspective here at MyNewsFire. I want to share with you some of the things that we're doing internally with our security program, as well as how we believe the MyNewsFire platform can help you do some things better in your program. So I always like to start these conversations with defining what problem it is we're trying to talk about. And really today's challenges in our industry, I view it as 4 kind of distinct sets of problems. One of them is in the whole world of cybersecurity, we just can't do it all well. If you look at the industry frameworks that are out there for managing cybersecurity programs, on average, they have somewhere about 200 controls. So I'm thinking about NIST and ISO and the CIS-20, a lot of the regulatory requirements like HIPAA and PCI. In general, they have somewhere around 200 security controls, and we just simply cannot do all of them well. I've never run into an organization, and I've consulted for hundreds of different organizations in every different industry, and I've just never seen a program that's really good at all of those things. It's really difficult for us to figure out where to spend our limited cybersecurity budget, and then justify it. And I think part of this problem is because a lot of our stakeholders that we need to convince that we need funding from, they don't speak cyber. And so, it's difficult for us to clearly articulate to them without being fear mongers what we need, why we need it, why it's important to the business. There's a general lack of understanding of what's normal in the industry. We as practitioners, I would say outside of consultants that spend their entire careers out in the field working with different clients, we tend to be very insular in our industry. We kind of know what we're doing within our organization, but it's difficult to really understand what our competitors, peers are doing. And I know sometimes as a practitioner, it's easy to say, well, why should I care what my competition is doing? But if we think about how business leaders view competition and security, they say to themselves, if I'm spending $1 more than my competition on security, I'm actually at a competitive disadvantage because my competitor is spending that dollar elsewhere on something else in the business. And so understanding kind of what normal looks like for our industry, what normal looks like for our competitive landscape, our peers, is good. I will say that this particular problem that I highlight here is a little bit better than it was a few decades ago, because now we have information sharing groups, we have the ISACAs, we have InfraGard, we have local consortiums of cybersecurity practitioners that get together and share information. A few decades ago, we really didn't have that. We were kind of very hesitant to talk about what we were doing in cybersecurity. And so I would say that, once upon a time, there was a lot of peer sharing that didn't necessarily happen. And so that particular situation, I think, has gotten a little bit better. And then finally, the fourth struggle, and that is, feeling confident that we're both compliant and secure. And, compliance drives so much of what we do in our industry. If you're in healthcare, being HIPAA compliant it's not optional. If you're in, education, FERPA and COPPA are not optional. If you're in retail, PCI is not optional. But there's a big difference between being compliant and being secure. And so struggling between, those elements of running a security program is a very real issue. I think those four challenges really define a lot of the struggles that we as security leaders have about how do we direct companies, our companies, on where do we spend that next dollar. So how did we get here? I think maybe a little look back at history is important here. The world has fundamentally changed. The business world, how human beings interact with data has fundamentally changed in a very short period of time. 2 decades ago, a decade ago, we didn't have augmented reality. We didn't have curbside pickup. We didn't live in an app-based world. And today we interact with data and we expect things out of technology that we didn't expect. But in the cybersecurity landscape, we really didn't evolve at the same speed that business evolved at. And so I've got this little timeline here. I thought this was kind of interesting, maybe a little cute, but it illustrates the point. HIPAA was passed in 1996. FISMA, the Federal Information Security Management Act, which led to the creation of the NIST standards, was passed in 2002, as was Sarbanes-Oxley. PCI became a standard for credit card security in 2004. The iPhone didn't exist when any of those frameworks or laws were passed. And so if you're a cybersecurity practitioner today and the boss comes to you and says, we're going to go app, we're going to go cloud, we're going to go mobile, we're going to do curbside pickup, we're going to go digital, our first reaction is to go look at these old frameworks that they don't speak any of those languages. And so, these changes in business, these changes in technology really represent a profound change in the cybersecurity landscape. But what we have done in the past is we've defaulted to these old frameworks in order to figure out what are the types of controls that we need to put in place. And I'll share one other incident about how we got here. In the early 20 teens, we saw a lot of retail breaches, big ones. And what happened was a lot of companies, especially in the Fortune 500, spend an enormous amount of money on cybersecurity. And the problem really didn't go away. It actually got a little bit worse. And so what happened was boards and corporate executives started to recoil a little bit and say, hey, cybersecurity practitioners are trying to scare me. They're trying to use fear, uncertainty, and doubt in order to drive cybersecurity spending. So there was this little bit of a recoil in our industry in the early 20 teens to say, I'm just going to do what I need to do to be compliant, and I'm not going to worry about having this excellent, cybersecurity program. In a sense, we as cybersecurity practitioners, to a certain degree, did ourselves a little bit of a disservice because we got really nervous about talking about what the enemy's doing, and we really focused on controls maturity, and we went back to these frameworks that again came out of the late 1990s and early 2000s, and so we didn't innovate to the degree that we needed to in order to keep up with some of these changes. Just look at the last year, what's happened with remote work and curbside pickup and all of the amazing things that have happened in information technology. Look at the education sector and remote delivery of education services. Fascinating, but yet in cyber we're still kind of leaning on some of these older frameworks. Okay, so enough about the past and how we messed it all up over the last few decades. Let's talk a little bit about maximizing the budget. None of us, I've never met a security practitioner that said, I have more than enough either people or financial resources to get done what I need to get done. So what are the steps we can take in order to maximize the security budget? I would say number one is a really healthy assessment of where we're at today. What capabilities do I have? What's in the toolbox? And I know we talked a little bit about this yesterday for those of you that were in the threat modeling presentation, but this isn't just about compliance assessments. This is really about taking a holistic view of what do I have in the toolbox? And then, where do I need to strengthen the security program? I'll share with you a story. I was working with a client of mine, fantastic client, that said, I want to get to a level 3 or 4 maturity in every single thing that I'm doing. And, we really had to unpack that a little bit and answer the question, is that actually possible? And I think the answer is, in most security programs, it really isn't practical to say, I'm going to be average or good at everything. There's this practical reality of, I can be really good at a few things. I'm going to be kind of okay at some things, and then there are some things where I'm just going to put the check in a box to be compliant, or maybe I'm not even going to waste my time and energy on those particular defenses. Understanding who the biggest threats to a particular industry are is really important. What tactics are they using? This is back to threat modeling. We kind of shied away from threat modeling over the last decade. And I think the importance of doing that has re-emerged as a critical part of having a risk-based conversation. The big conversation is about risk appetite. And this is a tough conversation to have. And I'd like to share with you a little story from my personal journey in cybersecurity. I was a consulting CISO for a company, and I went to the board and I asked them a question. I walked in all puffed up and I said, what's our appetite for breach? And the board said, 0. And I said, well, that's great. I'm going to need $12 million for the cybersecurity program this year. And I got thrown out of the room. Get out of here. And over time, that conversation evolved into, could we survive a breach at an individual location? This is a global organization. Could we survive a breach at one location? Would that be company ending? No. Okay, what about a region? That's not desirable. Okay, what about a company-wide breach? Absolutely not. And so I got some guardrails from the board and the executives on what was tolerable, what was company ending, what would insurance cover versus what would it not cover, what types of controls did I need to be very precise with versus what could I be kind of mediocre at and still accomplish the objective of preventing a company-wide data breach. There's a fantastic bit of guidance out from the National Association of Corporate Directors around cyber risk oversight. Highly encourage you to take a peek at that. And really what it gets down to is having that conversation with executives on what are they comfortable with from an incident perspective? How comfortable are they with different scenarios? Here's the kicker though, it's on us as cybersecurity practitioners. We have to lay out those scenarios for them and talk about, this is how likely that is. This is what I have in place to stop it or not. These are who the threat actors are. And, you know, as an executive, where are you at with the comfort level with where we are? I think often as security practitioners, we get into the mode of we don't sleep at night because the company is accepting risks that maybe it doesn't really understand that it's accepting. And this risk appetite conversation is a fantastic way to flesh some of that out and help me maximize my budget. Just to share with you what this conversation looks like internally at MyNewsFire, I'm a new CISO. I just walked in the door. You know, I'm having a conversation with the executives around, we're launching this brand new portal, MyNewsFire. It's a venture into the digital realm that is relatively new for our company. We're a managed security services provider. I've got to lay out risk scenarios for the executives and ask those questions around, you know, what are we comfortable with? And as an example, you know, the rollout of MyNewsFire led us to have conversations internally about our application security program. Historically speaking, managed security services providers don't have really intense, deep portals that have lots of information in them about our clients. And this is something that, wow, we really need to have robust authentication. We need to have a good application security platform that analyzes the app for OWASP vulnerabilities. We need to do static and dynamic source code analysis. And so, you know, that conversation was one that happened first at the highest levels of the company and then turns into the action plans for what specific controls and defenses that we put in place to protect, you know, that application. Every industry is different and your mileage will vary. I know I've got some friends, you know, on the webinar here that are in higher ed, and higher ed is a really challenging environment to do security for because information wants to be free in a higher ed environment. So there are just all kinds of different scenarios in different industries. Manufacturing, the conveyor belts need to run. Healthcare, client privacy and PII is critical. So every industry is different, and we have to be cognizant of that. Let's talk a little bit about key initiatives here. You know, part of the struggle that I've had as a practitioner is justifying that something that I did actually mattered, actually made a difference. And what I've kind of taken away over time and some of the work that we're doing here at MyNewsFire with our security program, as well as within the MyNewsFire platform, is figuring out how to create a blueprint for maturing the cybersecurity program over time. And just making sure that, you know, I'm consistently improving the performance of the program over time. And so when I ask for something, it's because it's for a purpose, it's for a need, and I can clearly articulate why. And part of that is about capability or lack thereof. I have a capability, I need to get better, or I don't have a capability that I really need to deploy in order to protect myself against a specific threat. Part of it is also the credibility aspect of this. You know, can I demonstrate over time that my performance, you know, that I got better? Did I use the money that I've gotten to date wisely? Business executives love to look at security people and say, well, we didn't get hacked in the last year. Was that because I spent all this money, or, you know, would I have not have gotten hacked anyway? And if I can demonstrate to the board and to the executives, here's what I've asked you for in the past. Here's how I increased our security posture over time. And these are the threat actors that I was able to help protect us against. That really is helpful to me as I'm trying to mature the program. Industry-specific threat information. We kind of recoiled a little bit, as I mentioned in the last slide, from talking about the bad guys. And the reason for that was, we didn't want to be accused of using fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And as a result, we kind of stopped paying attention in our industry for a very long period of time to what the enemy was doing. That was a bad move. And that was something that I think we're starting to see the pendulum swinging the other way. And we as cyber practitioners are starting to pay more attention to. Who is the enemy that's relevant to me? How are they operating? What are their tactics and techniques? We've got to pay attention to this. And the trap that we can get into very easily is paying attention only to capability. How well am I using the tools I have? How mature am I in my controls? Without matching that up against the threatscape and what the bad guys are doing. Very important to pay attention to that. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. Business is always in motion. I'll share with you another kind of funny anecdote from my consulting career. I walked into a CISO's office and he was on fire. I was there for a consulting engagement. I was going to work with him on security strategy and program. And he said, if I could just get the CIO to quit deploying all this technology without asking me first, we would be way more secure than we are today. And I thought to myself, we have a problem here, because the business is always in motion. There is no stopping business from moving forward. The mandate of not just CIOs or CTOs, but chief digital officers, marketing people, they are voraciously hungry for more data, more customer interactions, more technology. And so there is no stopping, the speed of business. And as security practitioners, we have to accommodate that. They're never going to ask us for permission to do what they need to do. The best thing we can do is be in the room while these decisions are being made and ask the questions. Who are the bad guys? What do we need to do about potential risks? Have that risk appetite conversation. And really, we like to pay lip service to being an enabling force. But I think more practically and realistically, it's about not being a blocking force. Meaning, if we are having these conversations with stakeholders and we can throw out there with credibility, these are the risks, what should we do about it? We're in a much better situation than kind of folding our arms and saying, boy, if I could just stop this business from moving forward, we would be a lot more secure. Leveling up security program. In 25 years, I've had a lot of clients, and then now as the CSO of MyNewsFire, my company, asking me, what do we need to do? How do we get better? And I would say that the first thing is about the mentality of let's be threat aware, risk centric, and always adaptable. If we walk into the security program with the idea of, I know I've got these 200 knobs and dials that I can turn, and as long as I'm paying attention to who the enemy is, paying attention to the business, and focusing on being adaptable, my odds of success go way up. When I think back to my early days in the industry, things were pretty simple. You had firewalls, you had vulnerability scanners, you had antivirus software, and that was kind of it. I mean, you really didn't have a whole lot from a defensive point of view. Fast forward to today, and there are hundreds of endpoint products. Network security is a combination of not just traditional network security, but cloud and mobile and all of that. So I think we have to recognize that the old tools are old, and sometimes they're very point specific. They're not engineered to solve for some of the problems that we have today. Now I'm going to counter that comment in the next slide by talking about using our existing tools, and so we'll spend a little bit of time on that. But I think the point here is, this is a game of adaptability. It really is a function of, let's be honest about where we are in the program and practical about where we need to go. Gone are the days where we can convince ourselves that we can go pick 200 controls and strive for average maturity in all of them and expect to keep the bad guys out. Because here's what happens. I can be at a level 3 out of 5 of maturity in 200 controls, but if the bad guys are at a level 4 or 5 out of 5 in sophistication against attacking a few of those controls, they're going to win every time. So the idea here is, let's key into the business. Let's figure out what's going on, answer the question, what do we need to do to protect it, and be really good at just those few things. And if we can do that, we level up our security programs. It truly is a journey. I'll share with you the best security rating I ever gave a client of mine was in physical security. And I gave this client a 5 out of 5 on maturity and physical security. The client was a zoo. Well, it turns out if you're a zoo and you have polar bears that can eat people, you should probably be a 5 out of 5 in physical security. And that was kind of an aha moment for me. I realized, oh, you know what? This particular organization has determined that they're going to invest maximum effort into making sure that polar bears don't eat people, but they're probably going to be okay with the fact that maybe somebody compromises the point of sale system in the gift shop and there's a loss of credit card information. I'm okay as a customer of the zoo. I'm okay with that trade-off, and I think that's the kind of conversation that we need to have when we're trying to level up our security programs. Where do I need to go from a 3 to a 4 to a 5? Where should I be really excellent? What are the 1 or 2 things that I should just be really super good at? Industry insights. Knowing who the threat actors, who the bad guys are in a particular industry is of critical importance. I mentioned earlier, the differences in threat, not only actors, but threat vectors and tools, techniques, procedures, tactics that the bad guys are going to use in different industries, and really understanding, what's likely to be successful. I used an example in yesterday's webinar. I'll use it again today. We know that in the healthcare setting, ransomware is far and away the most egregious risk that healthcare organizations face. We also know that if a healthcare organization can do 3 things, they drastically reduce the risk of ransomware impacting patient care. One of them is network segmentation and getting biomedical devices off of networks that do other things like billing or HR systems, that kind of stuff. Multi-factor authentication, privileged access management. If I can do those 3 things really well, I take my ransomware risk in the healthcare setting down significantly. That's an exercise that every industry should go through. Who are the bad guys? How would they attack me? And by the way, if you want to model some of these threats out, you certainly could do so in the MyNewsFire threat modeling tool. That's available for everyone. There'll be a slide at the end here, which will show you how to do that. Finally, I made a point in the last slide about how the tools that we have may be old, but then I've got this kind of maybe a little bit contrary bullet point about how can I use the tools that I currently have to pivot when threats change. I want to share something about how companies generally buy security and IT tools. We generally buy these tools on 3 to 5 year enterprise license agreements, especially the big tools. Network security platforms, endpoint security, EDR, managed security services like what we do at NewsFire. Generally speaking, those are acquired in 3 to 5 year contracts. Well, what's very interesting about some of these larger platforms that you might own an enterprise license agreement for is in that 3 to 5 year period, those companies are out acquiring or developing other capabilities. And so what we often find when we're out in the field or our clients are asking us to manage technologies is that they purchase technology that they have access to features that they're not even necessarily aware that they own, because their enterprise license agreement was done 2 years ago, 3 years ago, a year ago, and they've got capabilities because that company that they bought the ELA from has expanded their portfolio. The point here is taking good stock of what tools you have today, what capabilities you have, and do you maybe own something that you're not necessarily aware of from a capabilities perspective. Fantastic example of this. If you look at the big network security providers, the big firewall companies, Cisco, Palo Alto, Checkpoint, Fortinet. If you look at the companies they've acquired in the last 5 years, cloud security, cloud risk footprint monitoring, endpoint security products, these companies are consistently expanding their portfolios. And so, taking a good hard look at what tools you have today, and do you have capability that maybe you didn't initially seek to buy that you may own, is a really healthy exercise to go through. So finally, I'll leave you with this. What's my view on what a next generation security program looks like? This is my vision for NewsFire. This is, as the Chief Security Officer of NewsFire, this is what I strive to deliver to the company, to NewsFire's customers, to my executive management team. First of all, very industry specific recommendations on where to invest. These are the things we need to pay attention to. And the things where, as I'm doing the budget over the course of, the coming years, what are the things that are specific to us? Expertise from my peers, folks who have been in my shoes, to help us become more secure. We are all better when we work together. And I think part of what you'll see on the following slide when we invite you to sign up for MyNewsFire is we at NewsFire are actually sharing some of this stuff that we're putting together for our own security program with you. And part of the reason behind that is if we can all share with each other our experiences and be very realistic about what's working and what's not, they get better. And I have to share that having spent 2 decades in the field and being a cybersecurity consultant for most of my life and now transitioning into a CISO role, some of the most rewarding moments in my career were when I was able to share information back and forth with my peers and figure out how to do something different or better. Avoiding pitfalls. There are a lot of failed projects in our industry. Network DLP, NAC, GRC tool implementations, public key infrastructure deployments, secure mobility, right? I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And some projects are more failure prone in certain industries than in other industries. I've got a lot of friends in the healthcare sector, and I've never seen a network DLP project go flawlessly in that particular sector, whereas in the financial services sector, network DLP projects tend to go pretty well. So avoiding pitfalls is really important. Part of what damages us as security leaders is when we have failed projects. It costs us political capital. It causes folks to question the requests that we have for budget. It's just kind of bad all the way around. So avoiding some of those pitfalls is critical. What's good enough? I think that's a question that we often are hesitant to ask because we want perfect, and perfect is the enemy of good. What's good enough for the industry that I'm in, for the budget that I have, for the resources that I have, for the people that I have? Where should I do this myself versus where should I have a consultant help me versus where should I have a managed services company, do this work for me? What's good enough for the situation that I'm in? And that gets back to that risk appetite conversation that I think is so important. Showing progress over time is critical. I've never had a peer of mine, a prior client of mine, that didn't have some sort of a struggle with proving value and showing metrics over time. And metrics are pretty complicated because we have, operational metrics that we need to look at every day to figure out are tools working the way that they should be or not, versus we have key performance indicators which tell me about program health. But anything that can show progress over time and demonstrate improvement is a good thing, which leads to that second to last bullet point, which is, it puts a focus on where to invest. Where do I have these gaps and what are the things that really matter to the business? Where should I really be paying attention to, the parts of the security program that either I chose previously to not pay attention to, or the bad guys have changed their activity, and now I really need to take a second look at the magnifying glass out and take a look at that part of the program and ask myself, am I doing everything here that I need to be doing? And finally, being dynamic. I mentioned adaptability earlier. Really, there's nothing status quo about what we do for a living as practitioners. This is a fascinating career. It's not for the faint of heart, and we have to be able to adapt to changing industry trends. 5 years ago, you couldn't push a button on your phone and have food delivered to your house. And the way that we interact with the digital world, and the way that we interact with data, and the way that companies interact with individuals has radically changed. And so there's nothing status quo about what we do for a living, and being able to bend and flex and adapt is super important. Finally, before we turn it over to Q&A, would just like to share, we just launched MyNewsFire this week. We launched it on Monday. Really fascinating for me, as I mentioned, as a new CISO. Would love to have you go out there and sign up and take a peek at it. We want your feedback. It's got some threat modeling capabilities through the threat modeling tool that you're welcome to use. It's got a little self-assessment tool in the NewsFire security program we'd love for you to use. It's there for you. As I mentioned in yesterday's webinar, at some point we would like to monetize this, but today we really want the feedback. And so please feel free to go out there and check it out. And we'd love to have your feedback. I promise you that I'll take your feedback personally. I have a company to protect, and I'm using this platform for exactly that purpose. And so if you have feedback for me, I would love to have that, and we'll certainly incorporate it. And Amber, I'll pass it back to you for any questions that we might have.
Perfect. So I want to do one more quick commercial for MyNewsFire. If you do go out, you have the QR code or the URL there at the bottom of your screen. Sign up, complete your profile. The first 100 individuals that complete their profile will get a voucher from us for a gift store that we've set up. So you have a chance to get a cool North Face pullover, or a cooler bag, or some other fun summertime gear. So that's one incentive. But one individual from those 100 people will also receive 4 hours of time with JR. So if you enjoyed hearing from him today, you'll get to spend some time with JR and some others from our leadership team, really diving into more detail for your specific security program, and you'll get to pick his brain a little bit more than you'll have time to do today. So additional incentives for signing up. If you do have questions, feel free to submit them via the chat or the questions panel. JR, one question I do have for you. So we've heard even earlier in the week, Louis talked about the average tenure of a CISO is 18 to 24 months.
Right.
Do you think that any of the information you've shared today, or any of the tools or insights that are out there, how can we fight that, I guess, is really the question. How can we extend that tenure so people are not getting burnt out so fast?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a couple of thoughts. Yes, the average CISO tenure is 18 to 24 months. And when we look at why CISOs leave their company, it really comes down to a few categories. First and foremost is misalignment with the CIO or the chief digital officer. So this is a scenario where the CISO becomes kind of a blocking force, and eventually the business just gets tired of being told no, and they boot the CISO. So that's kind of the big reason that CISOs fail. I would say the other two that are very common. One of them is the merger and acquisition scenario, where two CISOs walk into the gladiator scenario. They let the lions out, and one CISO walks out. Right. And that's kind of, I hate to say it, but that's kind of unavoidable. But the third one I found really interesting in the study that I did on quote CISO mortality. And that is failed projects. Failed projects over time lead to a distrust that the security program is operating efficiently and effectively. And when I kind of double clicked on failed projects, what I found was the ones I mentioned earlier: NAC, DLP, big identity governance projects are very highly failure prone. GRC tool implementation projects, very highly failure prone. What all those projects have in common is that they're not terribly difficult to deploy from a technology point of view, but they do require robust business analysis in order to be successful. Meaning requirements have to be created, use cases very well understood before those projects are successful. And so, there's an old joke about the CISO that, couldn't plan a rock fight if you gave him 2 rocks. And, that really comes to bite us when we try and do projects that require really robust business analysis and use case definitions. So I think part of what we need to do is avoid failed projects. The merger and acquisition scenario, there's really not a whole lot we can do about that. Just kind of is what it is. But then that alignment with the CIO component, that's back to that key initiatives and enabling the business and really being keyed into what the business is doing and asking the question, how do I protect this organization given, what it's going to do? I have to share with you that last year I had an amazing opportunity to work with a client who was a traditional brick and mortar retailer, and they made the decision to transition to curbside pickup due to COVID. And the stakeholder that I was working with was the chief digital officer, and that person did not speak security at all. And so they didn't even speak technology. They were they were more of a kind of look and feel, more of a marketing professional than an IT professional. And so here I found myself as a security practitioner, as a consultant at the time, learning how to communicate with essentially somebody who was a marketing executive who was trying to transition a business, by the way, quickly in an emergency in order to keep the business up and running and enable curbside pickup and mobile app and all that kind of stuff as a result of COVID. And so I think, as a part of protecting the CISO and keeping the security leader relevant, it's as much about adapting to the changing business climate and staying current to what's going on in the business as it is, practitioner understanding and staying current in our own professions.
Excellent. One more question to wrap us up today. Somebody's thanking you for the time. So it's been very helpful. You've mentioned other industry categories, but haven't touched on the legal vertical. They're asking if you can share any top of mind relevant, threat actors or bad actors for that industry. If you're not prepared to speak specifically to that, where can folks get information on other verticals that we haven't touched on today?
That's such a great question. And I smile because I have to say that has got to be the hardest vertical to be a security leader in, period. And the reason is, in the legal industry, the partners are all kind of, each of them are CEOs. And so you end up being a security practitioner to many CEOs, and all of them have a veto. They can all say no. And so every security control that you put in place, you kind of have to sell it to each of them. And so it is an enormously difficult vertical to be a security practitioner in. So I really appreciate that question. A couple of things. One, one of the things that we know based on some of the major legal compromises that have happened over the last 5 years or so is that the bad guys really like to go after document management systems in the legal setting. And by the way, it's not just a legal setting. It's also in healthcare too. A lot of healthcare organizations have developed document management and EHR systems that really mimic what the legal sector has done with document management. But the legal sector tends to be pretty good at developing really robust document management systems that are centralized and everybody uses, ways of moving documents around. And unfortunately, that's also really attractive to the bad guys. And so I guess to that question, the two things that we see in the legal sector that are really important. One of them is a good identity program. Lawyers and doctors, the two things they have in common: one, they don't know how to type complex passwords, anything beyond 4 characters for whatever reason. They can get law degrees, but they can't type big passwords. And two, they don't like anything getting in their way. They like to have access to their tech. So multi-factor authentication, is a really great step. If you can put MFA in front of the document management system, we see that just really takes, the bad guy risk way down. And then the other thing is the ransomware risk. So good email security. And I've almost, I hate to say it, I've almost given up on security training and awareness for doctors and lawyers because they don't do it. They skip out on it. If I can put some tech in place, I'm going for multi-factor authentication, and I'm going to do, some email filtering to make sure I stop that outbound command and control. So when they click on the phishing link, which they inevitably will, I can stop them from doing those two things. So I would say, if I can do those two things in that particular industry, that would get me a really good measure of protection against what the bad guys are that are relative to that sector are.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. This was really helpful. And Lawrence agrees with you that he shares your sentiments. Some of the sentiments you shared, he agreed with for sure. So
it's a tough industry.
All right. Well, we are about out of time today. So this does conclude today's presentation. As a reminder, please go check out MyNewsFire. Use the QR code, use the URL on your screen. As far as upcoming webinars, we do have our Q1 threat report webinar that will be coming out in mid-June. So check out our website, newsfire.com/events, for more details on that. And thank you so much for joining us today. JR, thank you.
Thank you, Amber, and thanks everyone for your time. I really appreciate it.
Take care. Bye-bye.